The Nexus trading station operated on the simple principle that commerce could flourish anywhere, provided you had enough armed guards and flexible morality. Today's particular blend of interstellar capitalism was proceeding smoothly until a young Kithaeron, picture a wolf who'd learned to walk upright and developed an unfortunate fondness for sparkly objects, knocked over a display of Centaurian crystal matrices worth approximately 47 years of the average dockworker's salary. The crash echoed through the marketplace like a dinner bell for opportunistic lawyers. "Containment protocol activated," squawked Security Chief Vextar, his brilliant blue plumage ruffling with bureaucratic excitement. The aviari took immense pride in their procedural thoroughness, which explained why their homeworld had never experienced a single day of interesting history. Destructive entity identified, economic damage assessed, neutralization authorized. 6 energy rifles swiveled toward the Kithaeron cub, who couldn't have been more than 12 standard years old. The kid's ears flattened against his skull as he backed away from the shimmering crystal shards, his tail tucked between his legs in universal canine submission. "Neutralization seems excessive," observed a voice from the growing crowd. "Unless you're planning to file that under educational expenses." The voice belonged to a human, unremarkable by most galactic standards. Medium height, brown hair going gray at the temples, wearing the kind of practical clothing that suggested someone who spent considerable time in places where fashion was less important than not getting shot. What made several nearby aliens take an unconscious step backward wasn't his appearance, but the way he smiled. It was the sort of expression that promised the conversation was about to become far more interesting than anyone had budgeted for. "Human interference not requested," Vextar replied, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "This is a security matter." "Everything's a security matter when you're holding the guns," the human said, stepping closer to the circle of armed guards. "But I'm curious about your risk assessment. You've got 6 trained officers with military-grade weapons pointed at a juvenile whose fight-or-flight response just shifted firmly into flight. Are you expecting him to spontaneously develop plasma cannons?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Zenthari trader, who'd been examining expensive fabrics, suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. The molluscan diplomat's eye stalks swiveled toward the nearest exit. Even the rock-hide merchant, whose species was literally made of animated stone, seemed to shift nervously. "Damage must be compensated," Vextar insisted, but his rifle had lowered several degrees. "Protocol requires—" "Oh, I love protocol discussions," the human interrupted, his smile widening. "Let's talk about the Galactic Commerce Code, Section 12, Subsection 44A. Specifically, the clause about proportional response to accidental damage by minors. I believe the exact wording is reasonable accommodation shall be made for developmental limitations in species demonstrating pack bonding behaviors." The Kithaeron cub's ears perked up slightly. Several of the guards exchanged glances. "Furthermore," the human continued, pulling out a small data pad, "Station Regulation 2847 clearly states that weapons may only be drawn in cases of immediate threat to life or critical infrastructure. Unless those crystals were somehow load-bearing, I'm struggling to see how a clumsy teenager constitutes a threat to station integrity." Vextar's crest feathers flattened. "You are unexpectedly well-versed in commercial law for a human?" The smile never wavered. "That's interesting. What exactly did you expect from my species? Mindless aggression? Diplomatic incompetence? Or perhaps you were hoping I'd do something characteristically human and solve this problem in a way that makes everyone deeply uncomfortable?" The silence stretched long enough for 3 different species to reconsider their shopping plans. The human's reputation preceded him in ways that manifested as carefully neutral expressions and sudden interest in distant objects. "Look," the human said, his tone shifting to something almost conversational. "Here's what's going to happen. The kid's guardian is probably frantic with worry and will be here within 10 minutes. The crystal merchant is insured for accidents. All Centaurian exporters are. It's basic business practice. And you've just created a public relations nightmare that's going to require approximately 6 hours of paperwork to resolve." He paused, studying the assembled guards with the detached interest of someone reading a particularly amusing technical manual. "Or," he continued, "I could show you the alternative approach, the one that turns this into a teaching moment about interspecies cooperation, conflict resolution, and why pointing weapons at children is generally considered poor form across most civilized cultures." Vextar's beak opened and closed several times without producing sound. "Here's my proposal," the human said. "Lower the weapons, help the kid clean up the mess, and when his guardian arrives, we'll have a reasonable adult conversation about restitution. In exchange, I'll pretend I didn't notice that half your security protocols violate 3 separate interstellar treaties, and everyone gets to go home with their dignity intact." The energy rifle slowly tilted toward the floor. "Alternatively," the human added, his smile taking on an edge that made the surrounding air feel suddenly thick, "you can continue with your current approach, and I'll demonstrate exactly why most species in this sector have very specific procedures for dealing with humans who feel their moral sensibilities have been offended." The Kitharan cub looked up at the human, with the kind of gratitude typically reserved for divine intervention. The crystal merchant, who had been calculating lawsuits and insurance claims, suddenly developed a strong interest in promoting interspecies harmony. Vextar holstered his weapon with the mechanical precision of someone following a script he didn't entirely understand. "Stand down," he ordered his team. "We'll pursue alternative resolution methods." "Outstanding choice," the human said. "Now, who wants to help our young friend here gather up these crystals before someone cuts themselves? And perhaps someone could explain to him that Centaurian matrices are grown, not manufactured, so they're actually rather sturdy despite their delicate appearance." As the crowd began to disperse and the guards reluctantly began cleanup duty, the human knelt beside the Kitharan cub. "Next time you're curious about shiny things," he said quietly, "ask first. Most traders are happy to let you look if you approach respectfully." The cub's tail wagged tentatively. "Are you really going to show them why threatening me was a bad idea?" The human's expression softened into something genuinely warm. "Kid, I just did." The broken hyperdrive cantina had earned its name through truth in advertising. 3 separate faster-than-light accidents had occurred in its general vicinity, and the establishment's owner had decided to embrace the theme rather than relocate. Tonight, it served as an impromptu debriefing center for everyone who'd witnessed the marketplace drama. 27 years I've been working these trade routes," muttered Grix, a mollusk Khan, whose eye stalks drooped with the weight of accumulated cynicism. "Never seen anything quite like that performance." Performance? The question came from Ketra, a young Zenthari whose crystalline skin still held traces of the purple flush that indicated confusion. The human simply recited legal statutes. A snort of laughter erupted from the bar's darkest corner, where barkeep Thorn had been polishing the same glass for the past 10 minutes. The ancient Gorak's stone hide bore scars from conflicts that predated most species' entry into galactic civilization, and his opinions carried the weight of someone who'd survived longer than seemed mathematically probable. "Legal statutes," Thorn repeated, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Child, if you think that's what just happened, you understand humans about as well as a fish understands orbital mechanics." "Enlighten us," said Dr. Yithmak, the station's ethereal psychologist. The translucent being's form flickered with curiosity patterns. "Your establishment has hosted humans before, yes?" Thorn set down his glass with deliberate precision. "Hosted, survived, learned from, Pick your verb. Had one human in here about 8 cycles ago. Quiet fellow, ordered synth alcohol, minded his own business. Then 3 Warlord Dan pirates decided to shake down my customers. The cantina's ambient chatter died as several patrons leaned closer. Warlord Dan raiders were famous for 2 things: their complete lack of diplomatic skills and their tendency to solve problems by making them explode. Pirates had modern weapons, military training, numerical advantage, Thorne continued. Human asks them one question. Before you rob these people, would you like to know what they're really thinking about you? Ketra's skin shifted to deep orange, the Zenthari equivalent of a frown. What possible relevance could that have? That's exactly what the pirates asked, Thorne said. So the human starts explaining, tells them how the Valachian couple in Booth 3 are calculating whether they can afford to rebuild their shipping business if they lose their cargo money. Mentions that the elderly Crystari diplomat is wondering if his grandchildren will remember him fondly if he dies here. Describes how the Fleshmet trader is composing what she thinks might be her final letter to her bondmate. The psychologist's form pulsed with professional interest. Standard empathy manipulation. Crude, but potentially effective. You'd think so, Thorne agreed. Except then he kept going. Started telling the pirates what their victims were thinking about them specifically. How the Valachian husband was noting the lead pirate's defensive posture and concluding he was probably the runt of his family. How the diplomat was categorizing their speech patterns as aggressively overcompensating for educational deficiencies. How the trader was wondering if they'd chosen piracy because they lacked the intellectual capacity for legitimate commerce. Grix's eye stalks curled in what might have been admiration. Psychological warfare through accurate social observation, elegant in its cruelty. Gets better, Thorne said. Human then asks the pirates if they'd like him to explain what everyone's thinking about their tactical approach. Points out that they'd positioned themselves poorly for a quick escape. Notes that they'd failed to account for the station's automated security response protocols. Mentions that their weapon selection suggested they'd never actually fought anyone who shot back. The cantina had grown completely silent except for the hum of life support systems. By the time he finished his analysis, Thorne concluded, the pirates were so busy questioning their life choices they forgot to be threatening. Left without taking a single credit. Haven't seen them since. That's disturbing on multiple levels, Dr. Yithmak observed. The human weaponized their social intelligence. Which brings us back to today's exhibition, Grix said, his voice thoughtful. The human didn't actually threaten those guards, did he? Worse, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Kavnash, the Kitharin cub's guardian, standing in the cantina's entrance. The adult predator's ears were forward in a posture of alert respect. He offered to educate them. Ketra's skin flickered between orange and yellow. How is education threatening? Kavnash approached the bar with the careful gait of someone accustomed to being misunderstood. My people have dealt with humans before. Not frequently, but enough to recognize the pattern. They don't threaten violence. They threaten understanding. Elaborate, Thorne said, pouring the newcomer a drink without being asked. Humans study us, Kavnash explained. All of us. They catalog our fears, our social structures, our psychological pressure points. Then they use that knowledge to make us confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. The psychologist's form brightened with academic interest. And this is considered threatening because they're usually right, Kavnash said simply. That human in the marketplace didn't need to hurt anyone. He just needed to demonstrate that he understood exactly why each guard had drawn their weapon, what cultural assumptions had led to that decision, and how those assumptions revealed unflattering things about their society's approach to conflict resolution. The smile, Grix said suddenly. That's what made everyone nervous. It wasn't predatory. It was analytical. Precisely. Kavanash nodded. Humans smile when they're learning something interesting about you, and the things they find interesting are usually the things you'd prefer to keep private. Dr. Yithmak's form pulsed rapidly. This suggests a species-wide approach to conflict resolution based on psychological pressure rather than physical force. It suggests, Thorne said slowly, that humans have turned anthropology into a contact sport. The cantina door chimed as several more patrons entered, their conversations dying as they noticed the gathering at the bar. Word of the marketplace incident had spread through the station's gossip networks with the efficiency of a well-designed virus. So what happens now? Ketra asked. The human made his point, diffused the situation, helped clean up the mess. Surely that's the end of it. Kavnash and Thorne exchanged glances that spoke of shared experience with human unpredictability. Child, Thorne said gently, if you think that human walked away from today without learning something useful about every species he encountered, then you've missed the point entirely. The real question, Kavanash added, is what he plans to do with that information. Security Chief Vextar stared at his terminal screen with the hollow expression of someone discovering their entire worldview had been systematically dismantled by a filing cabinet. The human's personnel records sprawled across multiple displays, a digital testament to bureaucratic inadequacy and institutional blind spots. How? He asked his deputy, a nervous aviary named Plixton. Did we classify this individual as low-threat, standard trader? Plixton's feathers rustled with defensive embarrassment. Initial assessment was based on standard metrics. No military record, no weapons, permits, no history of violent incidents. The profile suggested. The profile, Vextar interrupted, failed to mention his doctorate in comparative xenosociology from the University of New Geneva, his certification in interspecies conflict mediation, or his employment history with the Diplomatic Corps Special Cultural Affairs Division. The wall screens flickered to life, displaying security footage from various incidents across the past 2 years. Each clip showed the same unremarkable human, always appearing at moments of escalating tension, always resolving situations through methods that defied conventional tactical analysis. Incident Report 2847, Docking Bay 7, Plixton read aloud. Freight dispute between Crystalli and Thoraxian crews threatening to escalate to violence. Human intervention resulted in mutual understanding of cultural economic practices and voluntary resolution through modified payment schedule. Vextar selected another file. Explain this one. Trading floor confrontation between rival merchant houses. 3 hours of heated negotiations. Our human somehow convinces both parties that their dispute stemmed from fundamental misunderstandings about honor-based commerce. End result, joint venture. Perhaps he's simply skilled at negotiation, Plixton suggested, hopefully. The security chief pulled up a classified intelligence report that made his deputy's eyes widen. Plixton, are you familiar with the Kepler Station incident? The mining rights dispute? That was resolved through standard arbitration procedures. Read the classified addendum, Vextar ordered. Plixton's voice grew smaller as he scanned the document. Human advisor employed unconventional psychological assessment techniques, revealed underlying colonial trauma responses in both species, forced confrontation with historical injustices, resolution achieved through mutual psychological catharsis. He made 2 entire species have therapy, Vextar said flatly, in public, during what was supposed to be a legal arbitration hearing. The screens cycled through more footage. The human in a dozen different scenarios, always asking innocent questions that somehow led to profound revelations about species psychology. Always smiling that particular smile when someone said something that revealed more than they'd intended. Chief, Plixton said hesitantly, Are we looking at an intelligence operative? Vextar pulled up another file, this one marked with diplomatic seals. According to his official status, he's an independent cultural consultant, specializes in crisis anthropology and applied xenopsychology. His client list includes the Galactic Mediation Council, the Interspecies Ethics Committee, and approximately 47 different governmental agencies. What does crisis anthropology even mean? It means, said a new voice from the doorway, that he studies how different species behave when their fundamental assumptions about themselves are challenged. Both aviari spun toward the entrance, where Station Administrator Quilix stood with the tired expression of someone who'd spent the afternoon fielding concerned communications from various diplomatic offices. "Administrator," Vextar began, "we weren't informed." "Because it wasn't your concern until today," Quilix interrupted. The elderly Centaurian's silver carapace bore the scars of a long administrative career. Dr. Marcus Webb has been operating under special diplomatic immunity for the past 18 months. Diplomatic immunity for what? Quilix activated the room's privacy shields before answering. He's conducting a comprehensive study on interspecies conflict resolution for the Mediation Council. Every incident he's been involved in has been carefully documented and analyzed. His methods are unconventional, but his success rate is unprecedented. Plixton's voice cracked slightly. "Are you saying today's marketplace situation was part of some experiment?" "I'm saying," Quilix replied carefully, "that Dr. Webb requested permission to conduct a controlled demonstration of de-escalation techniques using a scenario involving disproportionate response to accidental property damage. He submitted the request 3 days ago. The silence in the security office could have been packaged and sold as a luxury product. "The crystal display accident was planned?" Vextar asked. "The accident was genuine," Quilix clarified. Dr. Webb simply positioned himself to observe the natural security response, and then demonstrated alternative approaches. The Catharan family volunteered to participate after he explained the educational value. Vextar's crest feathers flattened completely. "We were laboratory specimens. You were case studies in procedural rigidity versus adaptive problem-solving," Quilix corrected. "The footage from today will be used to train diplomatic personnel in recognizing when military solutions are inappropriate for civilian problems." Plixton was studying his datapad with the intensity of someone discovering religion. "Chief, according to this psychological profile, Dr. Webb doesn't just study our behaviors, he predicts them. His assessment report from last week accurately forecasted how each member of our security team would respond to different types of incidents. Including today's? Especially today's. He even predicted which guards would lower their weapons first based on their individual psychological profiles." Quilix moved toward the door, pausing to address both officers. "Gentlemen, you've just experienced what the diplomatic corps calls constructive cultural intervention. Dr. Webb identified a systemic problem with station security protocols, created a controlled scenario to demonstrate the flaws, and provided an alternative approach that preserved everyone's dignity while achieving the desired outcome." "But why the secrecy?" Vextar demanded. "Why not simply submit a formal report recommending policy changes?" The administrator's expression carried a hint of the same unsettling smile they'd seen earlier. "Because, Chief Vextar, 47 different species have tried that approach over the past century. None of them succeeded in changing anything. Humans prefer practical demonstrations." As Quilix left, the two security officers sat in contemplative silence, absorbing the implications of their afternoon's education. "Plixton," Vextar said eventually, "make a note in the daily log. Recommend immediate revision of threat assessment protocols to include psychological manipulation as potential security concern." "Yes, Chief. Should I also note that the manipulation was Beneficial? Vextar stared at the frozen image on his screen. Dr. Marcus Webb kneeling beside the Kithaeron cub, both of them smiling genuinely as they carefully sorted crystal fragments. Note that human definitions of helpful require significant recalibration of our expectations. The observation deck overlooked the station's central hub, where normal commerce continued with the blissful ignorance of those who hadn't spent their afternoon being psychologically dissected by an academic with diplomatic immunity. Dr. Marcus Webb stood at the viewport, watching cargo shuttles navigate between docking pylons, while a small crowd of today's unwitting participants gathered behind him. "So," said Barkeep Thorne, his stone features arranged in what might generously be called amusement, "how long have you been collecting us like specimens?" Webb turned from the viewport, and there was that smile again. But now everyone recognized it for what it was: the expression of someone genuinely delighted by the complexity of living creatures. "Since you started talking about me in your cantina 3 hours ago. Fascinating discussion, by the way. Your stories about previous human encounters were particularly illuminating." Kavanagh's ears twitched forward. "You were listening?" Station Administrator Quillix provided audio feeds, Webb admitted. "Part of the comprehensive data collection. Your perspectives on human methodology were invaluable for my research." Dr. Yithmak's ethereal form pulsed with what might have been indignation. "We were observed without consent during private conversations." "You were observed," Webb corrected gently, "while discussing observations you'd made about me without my consent. The ethical implications are complex." Chief Vextar stepped forward, his official composure somewhat restored after an hour of reviewing precedent cases and filing incident reports. "Dr. Webb, while your methods achieved the desired outcome, the deception involved raises serious questions about whether the ends justify the means," Webb interrupted. "Excellent question. Let me pose another. How many of you changed your behavior today based on what you learned?" The silence stretched long enough for a freight hauler to complete its docking sequence. "Thorne," Webb continued, "you've already modified your customer service protocols to include de-escalation techniques for interspecies disputes. Kavanagh, you're planning to request sensitivity training for station personnel who interact with predator species. Chief Vextar, your new threat assessment guidelines will prevent similar incidents from occurring." He paused, studying each face with the patient attention of someone reading a particularly engrossing novel. "Dr. Yithmak, your research proposal on applied empathy and conflict resolution was submitted to the Psychological Sciences Council 47 minutes ago. And Plixton, yes, I know you're monitoring from the security office. Your suggestion about cross-cultural awareness training for new recruits has already been approved by Administrator Quillix." Grix's eye stalks curled in reluctant admiration. "You orchestrated all of this." "I provided a catalyst," Webb replied. "You all reached your own conclusions based on evidence you observed and analyzed yourselves. The only manipulation involved was creating circumstances where those observations could occur naturally." "But the cub," Ketra said, her crystalline skin shifting to concerned purple, "was genuinely frightened. That trauma was real." Webb's expression softened. "Yes, it was. And that's why this method works. Real emotions produce real responses, which generate real learning. The alternative would have been theoretical discussions that everyone would forget within a week." He gestured toward the bustling hub below, where various species interacted with the casual efficiency of established routine. Every day on this station, cultural misunderstandings create micro-conflicts that escalate into major problems. Security responds with standardized protocols that rarely account for species-specific psychology. Traders avoid certain partnerships based on stereotypes rather than actual incompatibility. Diplomatic incidents fester because no one wants to admit they don't understand their neighbors. And you believe psychological manipulation is the solution? Vextar asked. I believe, Webb said, that most conflicts stem from people making assumptions about other people's motivations, without bothering to understand the cultural context behind those motivations. Today's exercise forced everyone involved to examine their assumptions in real time. Thorne's laugh rumbled like an avalanche. You turned an entire station into group therapy. I turned a potential diplomatic incident into a learning opportunity, Webb corrected. The therapy was a side effect. Kavanagh's tail swished thoughtfully. The Catharan Council will want to know about your research methods. My people have strong feelings about being studied without explicit consent. They'll receive a complete briefing within the week, Webb assured him, along with recommendations for improving interspecies relations throughout Kitharan space. Your people's experiences with prejudice provide valuable insights into how fear-based policies affect social cohesion. More research subjects, Dr. Yithmak observed. More collaborators, Webb replied. The difference is informed consent and mutual benefit. Today was necessary because none of you would have participated voluntarily in a study about your own biases. Now that you understand the process and the outcomes, future research can proceed transparently. Administrator Quillix emerged from the station's administrative section, carrying a datapad thick with communications from various governmental agencies. Doctor? Webb, he called. The Diplomatic Corps wants to discuss expanding your pilot program to 15 additional stations. The Mediation Council is requesting priority access to your preliminary findings, and the Interspecies Ethics Committee would like to schedule a formal review of your methodologies. Webb nodded absently, still watching the ebb and flow of commerce below. Tell them I'll need to complete the psychological impact assessments first. Can't recommend broader implementation until I'm certain the approach doesn't cause lasting trauma. Speaking of which, Quillix continued, young Kessera, the Kitharan cub, asked me to give you this. He handed Webb a small crystal fragment, carefully polished and wrapped in crude but enthusiastic artwork depicting various species working together to clean up a mess. She said to tell you that humans are weird but helpful, and she wants to study xenopsychology when she grows up. Webb examined the gift with the careful attention usually reserved for priceless artifacts. Well, he said finally, that's either the best possible outcome or the most terrifying one, depending on your perspective. The assembled group began to disperse, each returning to routines subtly altered by the afternoon's revelations. As the observation deck emptied, Webb remained at the viewport, still holding the child's gift, and wearing an expression that somehow managed to be both satisfied and concerned. Thorne paused at the exit. Question for you, Doctor. Today's lesson, was it about teaching us to be better, or about proving that humans can make anyone dance to their tune? Webb's reflection smiled back from the viewport's surface, and for once, the expression carried no analytical edge. Just genuine uncertainty. Ask me again in a year, he said. When we see whether you remember what you learned today, or whether you just remember being cleverly manipulated by a human who thought he knew better than everyone else. The barkeep's laughter followed him down the corridor, leaving Webb alone with his research notes, his ethical dilemmas, and the uncomfortable realization that the most important test subject in his study might just be himself.